Hi, I am Janelle Benjamin, and welcome to another episode of Twice as Hard. I am here with Dr. Janice Gassam Asare. Janice, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Janelle. It's such a pleasure to be in community with you. We're connected on LinkedIn, but I'm so excited to have a conversation with you.
I'm more excited. I have been a fan of yours for a very long time. For the viewers who don't know, Janice is an award-winning diversity, equity, and inclusion practitioner. She does all things inclusive environments, anti-racism like myself. She is the go-to for all things equity, for organizational practices and leadership. And if you're not following her, you certainly should be. She writes frequently for Forbes, and I'm just really happy to have this conversation. So welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm excited. I always love to talk about these sorts of things. So I'm really excited, and also to chat with other practitioners, because I feel like when I started doing this work, or when I entered this space, I didn't have any friends that were business owners, and I didn't know anyone personally that did this type of consulting. So it was really hard in the beginning to just navigate the space and figure things out. But I feel like I found my community of people on LinkedIn. And I feel like I just love that we're all able to have these sorts of conversations.
Yeah, likewise. I feel like, even through this series, the fantastic women that I'm able to feature, I feel like I've known you guys for a very
Yeah.
long time. Just because I followed your work, and we connect and we dialogue in other ways, but this is really our first meeting, and unfortunately I feel like I should have met you long before. So apologies for that, but I'm really happy to do so now, and just to kind of get to know you live for the audience. So Janice, really what I wanted to do through this series is feature some of the thought leaders in this space, and have a really organic conversation around the ways in which Black women have over time had to work twice as hard as our counterparts over the course of our career. Can you tell me a little bit from your perspective, I guess, where that notion comes from? Because I'm finding that no matter where women are, Black women in particular, are in the diaspora, we all have this kind of similar experience. And so where does this notion that we even need to work twice as hard come from, in your estimation?
Yeah, I think you brought up a really good point about Black women across the diaspora. We're all sort of, I feel like whether you are a Black American or a African living in the Western world, or whether you are a Black Caribbean, I feel like it's something that's been ingrained in us from our upbringing. I know for me, my parents made a lot of sacrifices to come here. My parents immigrated to the US from Cameroon. So always sort of felt this pressure that I needed to do well and I needed to succeed. And a lot of West Africans, I'm sure people have heard this before, where a lot of Nigerians say, like, in Nigeria, your parents only accept if you're a doctor or a lawyer, and that's it. And I think similarly in Cameroon, my parents really expected a lot of us. And I always sort of felt like I wanted to make sure the sacrifices my parents made were not in vain. But I feel like what we experience as far as misogyny noir, which is that we go through being not just women, but Black women. I think those experiences have made us feel like we have to excel. I think that's part of the reason why here in the US, Black women as a demographic are the most educated group of people here in the US. I'm sure those trends extend to Canada and other parts of the world. But I think that that has been ingrained in us since birth, where I know me personally, I feel like I'm not given the same space and grace to fall and to make mistakes as maybe my non-Black counterparts, where if I make a mistake, I think it's hyper scrutinized and it's magnified. And I think we even see this when we examine Black women in the public sphere. I think Serena Williams is a great example where she can't even express anger. Every tennis player and every sort of athlete has these moments where they're angry or they're frustrated. When Serena Williams expresses anger, she gets labeled as the angry Black woman. There was a I feel like it was a European artist, but I could be wrong. There was an artist that actually depicted her as this like monster stomping on her tennis racket at one of the games several years ago. After she sort of like she had a back and forth with one of the refs, and I feel like if that was a white European tennis player, it wouldn't have got the same reaction. Where I feel like we're hyper scrutinized for any sort of mistakes that we make. Even someone like Beyonce, who is well loved and well liked, when she makes a misstep or a mistake, there is a lot more criticism that she experiences than maybe a Taylor Swift or maybe a whoever. So I think that like we as Black women feel like we're not given the space to make mistakes, and we're hyper scrutinized, and that sort of makes us navigate the world feeling like we have to be twice as good and we have to work twice as hard as everyone else.
Yes, we saw that even through the summer last year with the Olympics, and the pressure to just even stay in the competition when you're not feeling well, and to extend ourselves in ways that I feel like a lot of times our counterparts just don't have to. And it's really interesting to me how that notion to that we need to work twice as hard really does permeate Black culture, no matter where we are in the world. And I'm here in Canada, you're in the States, and it absolutely is the same, right? It's almost generational. And I've had this conversation with a few of the other ladies through the series about how that notion has been passed down from our families. So talk to me about, did your family members tell you, from birth, like, Janice, you got to do it, you got to work twice as hard, you got to be twice as good? And how has that impacted your own career progression?
It's so interesting because I actually on my Instagram I posted, and I also posted this on LinkedIn. I saw someone on Instagram maybe a month or two ago post about her grandmother. It was a Black woman, and she posted about her grandmother who was I'm forgetting the country, but she came from, I believe, one of the West African countries, and she immigrated to the US. And so she was this, person on Instagram. She was sharing her grandmother's trajectory and how she owned a store and became an entrepreneur and overcome all of these sorts of barriers. And so I loved her story. And I think I wrote feedback under her picture, but it made me think about my grandmother. And my grandmother, she was illiterate, so she couldn't read or write. She only spoke the native language that my parents speak. And my parents are I guess the tribe where they originate from is called Bamileke. So my grandmother only spoke that native language. And in Cameroon, the official languages are French and English because we were colonized by the French and by the English. And so those are the official languages. My parents both speak French, and my grandfather spoke French. But my grandmother did not speak any English. She didn't speak any French, and she was a homemaker. She didn't have an occupation or a career. And I was thinking a lot about how, like, just telling her story, people may look at it and just be like, she lived an ordinary life, or a subpar life, and there's nothing extraordinary about her experiences. But she was married at 12 years old, and she raised 3 kids. And I think that in itself is Black excellence. And it doesn't have to be these people who are like the Barack Obamas and the Simone Biles and these people that accomplished the first.
Right.
I think that we also have to reevaluate our standards that we perpetuate, as far as, like, I think it's an amazing thing to show representation, because for young kids that absolutely matters. But I also think that we have to recognize that the single parent who's been working through the pandemic and taking care of their kids is Black excellence. And it doesn't have to be this sort of huge sort of accomplishments, the first Black student body president at Harvard or wherever, for us to acknowledge that that's Black excellence. So I think that hard work sort of mindset was instilled in me from my grandmother, because my grandmother, although people may look at her and say she was a homemaker, what did she do or what did she accomplish? She was a hard worker, and she lost or was starting to have impaired eyesight as she started getting older, and she passed away in 2017. But she started, her eyesight started to get impaired when she was in her, I think, late 60s. And she was still cooking. She was still tending to, there was a farm that my grandparents owned, and she would go to the farm and she would tend to the farm. And so I think that hard work was instilled from my grandmother, and she instilled that in my mom. And my mom had to retire early because she was injured. She was a high school French teacher,
Mhm.
and they were playing dodgeball, and she, my mom loves her heels. She always wears heels every single day of her life. She actually tripped and fell and dislocated her shoulder. So her shoulder never kind of went back.
Mhm.
So she's partially disabled, and she never went back into teaching. But I see like everything that my mom did growing up, and my mom for part of my youth was a stay-at-home mom, and then she went back to get all of her advanced degrees. And I think that was instilled in me, and seeing what my mom did now, I think that heavily influenced my desire to pursue a PhD. And even the fact that I do acknowledge that I'm a workaholic and I push myself sometimes when I should not be pushing myself. So I think that was sort of passed down from my grandmother. But I think all of us as Black women have similar stories where we saw our mothers and we saw our grandparents and maybe even our great grandparents working so hard. For people who are descendants of enslaved people here in the US, I read stories of what they experienced, finding out that their grandparents or their great grandparents were, working these laborious jobs, and were sharecroppers, and were in all of these sorts of like positions. And I'm like, I feel like that, I think the word is epigenetically was passed down from us.
Mhm.
Like, so um, Dr. Joy DeGruy, in her book, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, she talked about how trauma can be passed down from
Yes.
generation to generation. And I heavily believe that. And I feel like that sort of the idea of hard work and how we have to just sort of work so hard was passed down from generation to generation for so many of us, whether we're here in the US or whether we're in Canada or whether we are in the Caribbean or whether we are in Africa. I feel like that is something that is like a cultural thing that was instilled in us.
Yes.
So I definitely think that it's been very challenging to break out of that mindset.
Yeah, same for me. I feel like, as you're talking, we have a similar story. Like you made me think about my grandmother and just, the house and the chickens out back and the like, washing the laundry by hand and in the wash basin and just, like taking the curtains down and sunning the furniture and like just the works. Like the house had to be done from top to bottom on a daily basis. You wake up and you sweep it out. Like just everything that they do in climates like that. It's laborious. It's like, and and there and lunch is on the table like before noon, like dinner's ready before noon, like these women were powerhouses. And when you talk about Black excellence, you're totally taking me to like my foundation. When I went to Trinidad, where my grandmother's from, that's what I would see. And I would see women doing that. And in all the houses, all the, in the whole neighborhood, down the street, and the next parish over, and you name it. And it was passed down to me through my mother. I can recall like Saturday mornings, every Saturday morning without fail, you get up, you clean up the house. And it was like, and I'm talking like I'm like a 7-year-old child with like silverware, and I'm polishing it, and I'm like, varnishing all the wood in the house. And like, it's, I think, like you said, like that spirit of excellence is passed down, but also, that we actually need to be doing something always. I think that it's traumatic. It's not always good, but it's certainly a shared experience. And it's totally made me, I think, the person that I am, and I'm sure it made you the person who you are, just driven to constantly be doing something. And when we're not, just feeling that guilt, right? Like when I'm sitting down and I'm just, I'm a Scrabble player. So I've got my phone in my hand and I'm zoning out and my kids are bouncing all around and I'm Scrabble playing. I feel guilty. Like I need to get back to work. I need to be doing something, I should be doing the kids' laundry. I should be, creating another podcast. Like it took me a while to even do this. Like I had this concept in my mind since like last year, and I had to say, no, you're tired. Like don't do it now. Do it when you have the energy. And I think we need to give ourselves that grace and that space to do that. We don't do enough. So let's talk a little bit about, how does that extend into what we do when we show up in the workforce, and the ways in which, this the notion that we continue have to just be on this mill, we're all workaholics. How does that help us? And I guess, how does that hurt us in terms of our ability to move up in the organizations?
Yeah, I think that's such a great question. And I really appreciate the work of Trisha Hershey, who is like I don't know what she calls herself, but she's essentially a woman that created a community called the Nap Ministry. And she talks about the transformative power of rest, and not just like napping and not just sleep, but just stopping and pausing and dreaming, daydreaming, and how white supremacy and capitalism have taken away our ability to daydream and to just imagine and just to sort of fantasize about the life that we want to live. We feel like we don't even have the time to do that because, like you mentioned, we feel guilty for, and I feel like that too, where we have a TV, I just don't watch TV. I feel guilty if I do, and I have to take days or a day where I just am dedicated to, I'm like, I have to tell myself I cannot work 7 days a week. I'm like, okay, today will be a Netflix day.
Yeah.
And I have to commit to that, not open my computer and put on a show on Netflix. But I feel this sense of guilt. And I think part of it is I hear it from the community and from society where I am childless at the moment, and at some point I do want to have children, but my partner and I, we have no children. So people, I know he doesn't get this, but I get this, where people will say, oh, you're young, you shouldn't be tired, or, oh, like you still have a lot of energy in you. And I'm just like, yeah, but we're actually, like, this generation that we're in right now in 2022, we're the most productive generation that's ever been on earth, where we are. And I do this. So I'll take a shower, or I'll wash the dishes, or I'll clean, and I'll be listening to a podcast.
Right.
I'll be driving and I'll be listening to an audiobook. I feel like I have to be productive. I can't just take a shower and just let my mind wander. I have to be listening to something. I have to be, I have to be doing, my mind has to be moving. And so I think that, like, we don't allow ourselves the space to just take time off. And I think because of capitalism, because we live in these capitalist systems, we're not like, we have to work to live.
Yeah.
And I've been trying to really be intentional about giving myself rest. And I know that, like, being a Black woman that experiences racism that's ongoing, even if it's subtle, it's ongoing and it impacts my ability to do this work. I try to be kind to myself and try to give myself the ability to rest where I can. So just kind of disconnecting from my phone sometimes. I've made a practice of, because we do this, we're in this space, I find people can be very combative on social media. I know you've experienced that on LinkedIn. I've experienced that. I have a rule where I don't go back and forth with people.
Yeah.
On social media, I don't have the energy.
Yeah.
And I find that, people want to argue and people want to engage you and people want to bait you in these sorts of back and forth conversations. For my own self-care, I don't go back and forth. This is my opinion. If you disagree, I would love to hear your perspective, but I'm not trying to convince you of something.
Yeah.
Because I already feel like the work that we do can be very weathering, can be very exhausting. And the fact that, like, sometimes we come into environments where everyone isn't necessarily on board and everyone doesn't believe in what it is that we are trying to do. And there may be, like, barriers, and those barriers could be the systems or people who are like, who cares about diversity? I don't care about diversity. I don't want to give Black people an unfair advantage. So there's all of this. So I think that, like, it's really easy to get burnt out as a practitioner or as a DEI or anti-racism educator. It's so easy. So I think as Black women, we have to be more intentional about giving ourselves the space to rest. And what I love seeing, I know that there's some people who don't agree with this movement, but I love this Black women in luxury movement that I've been seeing online, where if you look on Instagram in particular and on TikTok, there are just a lot of visuals of Black women taking solo trips and getting, getting a spa, or going to a spa and laying in the water and just resting and relaxing and really practicing self-care in whatever ways that looks like for them. That could be splurging on a nice car, or whatever it is that self-care looks like for you. But I love this sort of, I feel like it's countering these stereotypes that we have, that Black women have to live a life of suffering.
Right.
And even in our relationships, I think that there's a belief that a relationship is a good relationship if a Black woman has endured some sort of struggle and has endured some sort of sometimes I see people posting, we've been through ups and downs. When I met this person, he wasn't a man, or he cheated on me multiple times, or this or that. And I just am like, why does love, in order for a relationship to be valid, why do Black women have to experience pain and experience struggle and experience, I love the countering of these narratives. So I think that we have to really be intentional about practicing self-care for ourselves in the space. And interestingly enough, probably unsurprisingly, Black people get on average an hour or two less sleep than our non-Black counterparts. So we're not even sleeping as long as white people or people of other marginalized groups. So we really have to be, and that's something I've been working on because I'm a night owl. And, my husband hates that I'm a night owl because he's a morning person, and he's like, it's not good for you. You can't stay up till 2 a.m. And I'm like, my body just doesn't. And I'm trying to train my body to go to sleep earlier so I can sleep longer. But really being intentional about caring for ourselves, because this work, we're expected to hold space for people. We have to make sure we're in the right headspace ourselves. And I feel like the work we do, we're almost like guidance counselors, or therapists for the company, where we're helping them navigate these very sort of traumatic situations. And who's checking in on us? And are we making sure that we're okay while we're doing this work? So I think being really intentional about self-care is something that I'm really trying to focus on this year and beyond.
That is awesome. I love hearing that, because personally, I don't do enough of that. I feel like you said, the work is so laborious and sometimes injurious to our beings. And I'm in it so much wholeheartedly, all night, all day. Like, I wake up sometimes and I immediately go to my phone and I'll start jotting something down, that like a to-do list, or don't forget to do this for this client or that for that client. And it's a constant battle within myself to shut it off, to say that can wait. And I'm not doing enough of the self-care piece, right? So, I'll look at, somebody's Instagram and I'll scroll and I'll be like, I should be creating posts right now. Like, why am I sitting here scrolling? And it's just to stop the urge from like working all the time. And like you said, we don't get enough sleep. We're working sometimes twice as hard. And literally we're more educated than our counterparts. We're doing all of these things. We're showing up, and still, we're having these struggles in our personal lives. We're having these struggles in the workplace. It's not translating always into increased opportunity, like you said, more rest, more joy, more economic wealth. Like we're still having the struggles that you'd think that a productive people that we are, that we would be receiving or reaping the rewards of all of that labor, and we're not to the fullest extent. So what would you say to just organizations in terms of how best to support Black women who are showing up at work every day and working so hard in their personal lives, in their their family lives, but in their offices, right? Seen or unseen, we're going above and beyond. We're going the extra mile. We're doing the work, sometimes the work that we're asked to do, sometimes the work we're not even asked to do. And what would you say to those organizational leaders, and how best to support us in those situations?
There's so many things. I think, first of all, like amplifying our voices. When we're in meetings, and I know for many of us, like I'm working remotely right now, But I also teach full time. So when I'm teaching, I'm back on campus. We might have a faculty meeting. And one of the things that I experienced a few years ago that I'll never forget is I teach at a mostly white or predominantly white private university. And so I'm the only Black woman in the business school. And we were having a meeting, this was maybe 3 or 4 years ago. We were having a meeting, me and two of my colleagues, both older white men. And I said something, and I have a colleague who's very enthusiastic, and he has a tendency to cut people off when he's talking. And so I was saying something, and then he cut me off to say something else. So I just stopped talking and I let him get his thought out. And then my other colleague was like, so-and-so Janice was talking. Can we go back to what it was that she was saying? And it was something so small and minor that he did, but I will never forget that. And that stayed with me. And I was like, wow, like I felt in that moment, I felt heard and I felt seen. And I feel like that happens so much to us in the workplace. And I think women in general, that happens where we're cut off we're interrupted much more than our male or non-female counterparts.
I was actually talking about that this week. Just
really?
Yeah, I just trained on it, like just the micro invalidations that we experience when you know, I don't really care what you have to say, Janice. What do you say, John? And they turn and they look away from us and invalidate our voices and our experiences and the things that we can contribute. And it's so problematic, right? It's yeah.
And how that makes you feel, where if that happens to you a couple times, I just, we just shut down. I'm just like, okay, I'm not going to say anything in the meeting because when I do. But I saw a TikTok where there was a girl who said Black women, and I think it might have been on Twitter. She also tweeted it. She said, Black women aren't given the luxury of being introverted. So if you're an introverted Black woman, you get labeled as uncooperative, or you get labeled as, whatever it is, all of these negative attributes where it's like, why don't you come to the after work happy hour? Why don't you fraternize with your colleagues? And it's like, you might have social anxiety, you might be introverted, you might just want to go home and not, want to involve your coworkers and you want to draw the line, but we're not given the space to be introverted, and we're not given the ability to do that. So I think amplifying Black women's voices, whether you're having a virtual meeting, there's things that you can do where, I think it's called the round robin technique, where you allow in a meeting each person an allotted amount of time to say something. So if I say, Janelle, we're going to let you speak for 2 minutes uninterrupted, right, you can get your thoughts out, and then you go to the next person, so that if there are people that are quieter on the team or who are more introverted, it gives them an opportunity to share their ideas without being interrupted. So I think amplifying our voices, asking yourself, what are we specifically doing to not just attract Black people? Because I think the big thing is like, how many Black people do we have? And that's how we assess progress, is like, did we have a 5% increase from last year to this year? Yes. Okay, so that's progress. But I'm like, is it really progress if those same Black people leave every year? Or if you have a high number of Black people turning over in the organization, is it really progress? Are you retaining them? And even if you are Black women only represented in junior roles in your company? Right. What are you actually doing to help them advance in the organization? And I think for a lot of organizations, that's like, well, we don't know, we got them here, so what do we do next? Right. And I think for folks like us come in where it's like, it's not enough. Representation is not enough. It's not enough to bring us in if you're not supporting us and helping us to grow and thrive and advance. So I think that is really important. And then going back to your question of how do we create like safer spaces for Black women? I think a really big part of it is education. I think people just don't understand the experiences of Black women. And I had a conversation earlier today where someone was saying that she got on a call, a video call, and her colleague was like, oh my gosh, what did you do with your hair? And it was like that sort of uncomfortable thing where, I'm a Black woman that changes her hair a lot. I have different hairstyles. probably every, month or so. And I don't always want to have to explain what the name of my hairstyle is, how long it took, because that's a very common question is, oh my gosh, how long did that take? 8 hours? Oh my gosh, how do you sit there for, do you wash it every day? It's like all of these questions where it's like, I feel othered. And I think that non-Black people think it's like you're bonding with the person by asking these questions, but it's like, no, you're putting me on the spot where I might not want to have this conversation and give you the education on. So I think that like educating people on the different sort of nuances of the Black woman experience is important. And I also think that accountability is big, where it's like, what are you actually doing to hold people accountable in your company? Because I think that mentorship programs are amazing. Sponsorship programs are great for Black women. And ERGs and affinity groups are great as safe spaces. But like, if people are causing harm in the workplace and you're not holding them accountable for the environments that they're creating, then I don't really think that anything is going to change. And people will keep leaving if they're continuing to experience harm.
Yeah, I'm seeing that happen a lot where, Black women don't have the psychological safety to speak up. They are, singled out, like you said. Sometimes people are rinsing their hands in their hair. But you touched on something a little while ago, and when you talked about, just feeling like I no longer want to contribute because you don't really care what I have to say. And a lot of times we suppress ourselves, we suppress our ideas, we don't give our fullest to the organizations because it's like, why should they get the best of us if they're not going to include us to the full extent? I don't feel like I really belong here. They don't really care what I have to say. I'm either, I'm tokenized right now, or they're using me for this. They're not really addressing the harms. Like you said, there's no accountability, in the policies or in the practices in this place. And I'm just going to come in and get my check and go home. I've heard that so many times. I'm just going to come in and get my check and go home. And that is such a sad, sad state to be for women who have worked twice as hard over their lifetime. They're working twice as hard at home in their personal lives. They've got all the credentials, all the qualifications. They deserve to be mentored and to have those positions, right? Quite frankly, there's a lot of incompetent people that are in roles that, they got because of nepotism or other things like that. And I feel like, it's a loss to these corporations or, whatever the organization entity is, and not for profit, you name it. It's just a loss when we're not able to show up as our full selves. We're not, contributing to our fullest extent because we feel othered, like you said. And I really want us to get away from that. It's part of the reason I wanted to kind of highlight and feature Black women through this series, because we have so much to contribute. We have so much to say, and I feel like it's just such a loss. So I really want to go ahead.
Yeah, no, and I was just going to say, I think it's even more important because we are experiencing the great resignation, and companies, there's so many open roles. I feel like every day when I open LinkedIn, I see someone got a new job, and I'm so excited. I keep seeing, people are getting new jobs, and it's like, it's not sustainable anymore to be creating or cultivating environments that are harmful and toxic. People, like, I think people's BS meter is very, very low. People's patience after COVID is very, very low. People do not want to be in environments that don't give them flexibility, that don't recognize and value their contributions, that are harmful. People just don't want to do it. So I think Black women have been sounding the alarm for so long. And I think now corporations are starting to listen because they're like, wait, we are not able to retain our Black employees. Our Black women employees are leaving. We're getting them in the door and something is happening where they're not staying longer than a year. What are we doing that we're able to attract this population of people, but they're not staying? And it's something that, something about the environment or the lack of inclusion or the lack of equity that is pushing people out. So I think it's just not sustainable anymore. And these younger generations, Gen Z and millennials that are coming up, want to see that companies are treating people well. That's something that's more important to them than maybe Generation X and baby boomers, where it's like really, really corporate social responsibility so important to them? How did your company respond to the social uprising or the racial revolution following the murder of George Floyd? What are you doing to this person who's engaged in racism or discrimination? How did you react when you found out one of your employees was part of the insurrection that happened January 6th? Like, so all of these questions. And I think I'm excited because people are just fed up and people are speaking out more.
Yeah.
So I think there's so much fear with companies where it's like, you don't want to get outed or you don't want to go viral on social media for being discriminatory or for treating people poorly. So I'm really, really excited that we're in this moment of empowerment where, if anything, if there is like a Black woman watching this who's in an environment that's toxic, which is very likely because I feel like we've all been there, I think you have so much power just on your social media. I know people are afraid and they say, oh, I don't want to get blackballed in my industry. And that's a very real concern. But I do feel like the opportunities will still come to you even if you put a company on blast for their poor treatment. A lot of organizations are not in a position where they can, their great resignation is putting so much power in the hands of employees.
Yes,
so I think that just things are shifting and changing. And I know some people call it the great reshuffle or are calling it the great reshuffle, but I think I'm excited about the moment that we're in because I see a lot of changes that are happening. Are you like seeing the same thing?
Totally. I see, as a result of that, though, a lot of performative work being done within organizations, right? Like, oh, we need an ERG quickly, or, we need a chief diversity officer or manager of diversity and inclusion. Like I had a request just a little while ago, and headhunters are like in my inbox all the time. And I'm like, let me ask you some specific questions. This is a manager role, reporting to whom? Is there a director in between? And if not, why is this not a director? Why is this not a VP? Why is this not a chief diversity officer? Right? So I start to push back. What's the salary range for the position? Is this, is there support? Is there staff to support this individual? Or are you just hiring, this one person that you think is going to come in and, calm the masses and shut everybody down? So I'm seeing, like you said, like a lot of power coming from the staff, rising through the ranks, and people kind of agitating to compel their leaders to do something, but the leaders are just doing the bare minimum or the performative thing to, put a band-aid on it and put it like a little stopgap measure. And so it's not all good. What I do love seeing is a lot of people saying, you know what, I'm not going to work there. I quit. I'm going to start my own business. I'm going to do this for myself. And they're using the powers and leveraging the power of social media to create their own lanes. And we're seeing Black women do that in droves, right? There's more entrepreneurship in Canada, at least for Black women, and I believe in the United States as well, than any other group. We're going into, and starting our own ventures because, we're not feeling that support within workplaces. And we know when, our leaders when they care or when they're just doing like the bare minimum or it's just performative and, okay, Black History Month is over and then they're on to something else. They don't really care about other things. So it's a mixed bag. I'm seeing, I don't know if you're seeing the same things, but
yeah, no, absolutely. I think a lot of it is performative. I get so many requests. So one of the services that I do, two things basically, is the workshops and speaking. And I love doing that because I feel like I'm an educator at heart. My parents were educators, so I feel like I really enjoy doing that. But where I feel like I make the most impact is when I'm consulting with clients and I'm able to develop long-term relationships with them. But I find that people request workshops, and oftentimes one-off workshops, more than they request working. Like it's like they want to commit, they want to have one foot in, but they don't want to fully commit.
yes.
So rather than hiring me as an external person that can help them navigate their DEI issues, that one workshop or 5 workshops is not going to resolve every issue. They'd rather just invest in the workshop to say that they've done the workshop or the series of workshops. And I think that I don't know if some of those efforts are performative. I think some of it is their heart is in the right place, but they're not fully ready to commit to like it takes a commitment, and it's always going to be, it's like ever changing and ever evolving. It's not like they're going to get to a place. And I think in my first book, I said, I feel like it's like a trainer,
Mhm.
where you have a personal trainer that's helping you change your body. Maybe you want to develop more muscles. So you have someone helping you with what to do in the gym or what to do as far as your fitness routine. And it's not like, you're going to have that person and then at some point it's like, okay, you don't need them anymore. You could use some of the tools and the lessons that they've helped you with.
Yeah.
But I think that you're always going to have a use. There's always going to be a need for that person. And if you've ever watched the show The Biggest Loser,
Yes, I love
I feel like a lot of times people end up gaining that weight back because those support systems are no longer there when they go back home. So
Right.
on the show, you're in a very sort of, everything in the environment is working to your benefit. But when you get back home into the real world, you have all of these things and you don't necessarily have that coach to help you. So I think that that's where a lot of companies find themselves, where I think doing the DEI's trainings and workshops is like going on The Biggest Loser, where it can help you.
Yeah.
But like a lot of companies end up reverting back to their old ways because they don't have that support system in place. And I think the problem with internal DEI people is that it's really, really hard to make changes if you are in the environment yourself. And I see this within academia, where I might see things in a university and I speak up and I want to make changes, but how am I going to change the people that sign my checks?
Right.
Like, it's like, how do I change these people? And then I might experience retaliation or backlash if they don't want to change. So I think it puts Black women who work in these organizations in a really tough spot, where it's easier just to keep your mouth shut and, like you said, just go get the check and go back home and not contribute in meetings, because you feel like when you do contribute, you're shut down. When you speak up, you are retaliated against. And so it's like, it's such a weird spot to be in. But what we're seeing here in the US, and like you said, in Canada, is a lot of Black people are actually leaving their jobs and starting businesses. So I think COVID accelerated that. And then the Great Resignation, where people are like, I don't want to go into the office. Like me personally, I think that students can gain so much value, and it's so much more convenient to have virtual school for at least college students. But universities will lose money because especially for undergrads who are not staying on campus, you're not getting that money for their dorms.
Mhm.
You're not getting their money for the food that they pay while they're on campus.
Right.
They're not getting the full college experience, but the university doesn't want to lose that money. So it's like they force people back into unsafe environments. And I just am like, I think academia is very similar to corporate, where it's just everything is about profits over people.
Mhm.
And so I just don't think that model, that business model, is going to be sustainable in the long term.
Yeah, for me, I feel like, what you're sharing is so true for me. I'm an introvert. I don't want to go into anybody's workplace, a couple days a week, maybe maximum, but I love being at home and I love the flexibility and I love to just keep my head down and I'm way more productive. Like, I feel like organizations are getting way more out of their employees if they give them that environment. And I'm really looking forward to see what happens in like cities years from now, and like just how cities transform as a result of more people working at home and like all those big office towers being knocked down and more residential high rises going up. Because do you really need to be leasing that office space? You know what I mean? Like, I think employers are going to start to really consider, how many buildings do we actually need? How many, if people are at home, can we give them the office chair and the computers and the desks and things that they need and the supports in their environment? And they'll save a ton of money as well. You know what I mean? So we'll
Exactly.
see
Yeah.
what happens.
No, and I think I love technology. And I'm one of those people, I'm really into like whatever new technologies are out. I definitely think automation and technology will be used in a lot of these essential like work jobs, especially for people who are part of like a cleaning staff. I think that there's going to be the development of machines and technology that can clean an environment without a person having to physically be there, just because, you only have to service the machines. And, there may be a lot of people who don't want to work those types of jobs anymore because you have to interact with, or you have to come into an office.
Right.
And I think people have gotten a taste of remote work, and me, myself, I was one of those people. When I first felt like, I have to transition my business, I didn't want to.
Yeah.
When COVID hit, and I was like, a virtual workshop? What? I do not like that. But now I'm like, oh, that's so much more convenient. If you have employees in different parts of the world or different time zones, it's just so much more convenient to do these things virtually. You can have the same sorts of the breakout room feature, and just, it's so much more convenient
And
for everyone.
the social impact is so much greater, right? Like how many
Yeah.
people can you reach? I just did a virtual workshop with like one entity with 9 offices in different regions of the world. And I was like, this is phenomenal, right? Like I wouldn't have met all of those people, and I wouldn't have had that organization as my client if we were in a different environment. And you're right. I love having like my speaking notes on the screen. Like,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah, exactly. It's just so much easier, and I think that being flexible with how people can receive the information versus having to be in a classroom type of setting where
Mhm.
some people might not be, it might not resonate with people depending on what type of learners they are. There's all of these like sorts of things to think about. So I just think companies not prioritizing like equity and inclusion is gonna, like, they're not going to be sustainable in the future, because I think it's such a priority now. It was a priority before, but it just blew up in the last year and a half. And I just feel like companies that don't focus on it, or the leadership just doesn't have time to focus on it, I think people will continue to leave, because people now, it's like there's so many job openings, especially also because a lot of I don't know in Canada, because I feel like Canada is much better than the US in many ways, but I don't know in Canada if this is the same. But I know, I just read that Nike is mandating employees get the vaccine,
Oh,
and if they get fired. So yeah, I think that like that will also, just all of the mandates with the vaccine are going to create a lot of just reshuffling, even in healthcare systems where a lot of nurses and healthcare professionals don't want to get the vaccine. So what does that do with, I've heard that hospitals are now charging double for the healthcare staff because there's so many openings and people are quitting left and right. So it's just like, how is that going to shape our world? So I think companies saying they're not going to focus on these sorts of things they're not going to be sustainable in the
yeah.
long term.
And I think from an equity standpoint, you're raising an interesting issue too, because as you are terminating people's employment for, not getting the vaccine, we know that, Black people are less likely to get it. You are pushing Black people out of your organization, and people, Black and brown people, more than any other group, right? Because of the just vaccine hesitancy. And so
Yeah.
what is that doing structurally to these workplaces as we are, ushered out? Here in Canada, there, whether you're in the federal or provincial government, there are different entities that are mandating and making that policy. Unless you have a specific religious accommodation that prevents you from getting the vaccine, you're going to get it, or you're pushed out. And when you're pushed out, you're not getting any severance. You're not getting any the designation that gets you employment insurance.
Mhm.
So, you're basically, your last paycheck is all you're going to be out with. And that's really detrimental, I think, to communities of color where, for whatever reasons, if we don't get vaccinated, if we're living check to check, you're literally not even eligible for unemployment. So it's problematic from an equity standpoint. But still organizations are doing it and hoping to compel people to take the vaccine. So, if you're Black and you're listening, and that's you, get vaccinated, or you're really gonna, in Canada anyway, I don't know in the United States so much, but a lot of people are losing their jobs and crying and bawling and running into their heads of DEI in the organization to say help me, but it's too late at that point. And it is a problem. So I don't think that the equity considerations are
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
factor in a lot of places.
Yeah. So I think all of those, like the vaccine mandates, what else? The the racial reckoning or the racial revolution,
Mhm.
and companies not prioritizing the needs of underrepresented employees, I think people are just fed up and their tolerance is very low for the BS in their company. So they're like, I've been here for 7 years and I haven't been promoted at the same rates as my non-Black counterpart over there. So I don't want to stay here. And there's also the rise of the gig economy where people can drive Uber and people can work different types of jobs, and make money online and make money as an influencer, whereas something the influencer thing wasn't here 10 years ago unless you were a celebrity, you know,
Right.
or a public figure. But regular people with large online followings can now generate money in different sorts of ways. So I think it's really pushing people to be more self-sufficient,
Mhm.
and also into entrepreneurship. So I think that that's really, really interesting, as well. So it's just like, it's really interesting to see how things will go. But I think companies that don't prioritize these things, they're not, they're
No,
going to get called out. And that's not people, you're not going to be able to attract diverse talent.
no, especially when you're not doing the structural things to address inequities. You're doing the window dressing. We
Yeah.
see right through that. So Janice, before we go, I want to just highlight some of the ways that you're currently working twice as hard. I know you've got books, you've got Forbes writing, you've got your podcast, and you've got all the workshops. Tell us how people can reach you and what's next on the horizon for you.
Well, I am trying to this year. So for the last 2 years, I've been like, since 2020, I've been like trying to choose words. And so this year, one of my words is abundance. So I'm really trying to put in, or lay the groundwork so that I can not work as hard, not work twice as hard, because 2020,
Mhm.
as I'm sure it was for all of us, was a really sort of overwhelming year for me because I saw business growth like I've never seen, and I didn't have the infrastructure in place.
Mhm.
I was literally running like a one-woman business, and I went from getting clients to cancel their workshops in March of 2020 to in June getting like hundreds of requests in my inbox, and I wasn't able to sustain it. And I was doing the best that I could, and I didn't have like the proper systems in place. So it was really tough for me. And 2021 was a very exhausting year too. So I just want this to be a year of abundance. And I want that to be an abundance of rest, an abundance of just, doing the things that bring me joy while also managing my business, and recognizing that it's okay to turn opportunities down. That was something that was ingrained in me. When you think about this twice as hard mentality, is like being grateful for everything that comes your way, but some opportunities are just not aligned with me. And so being able to have this abundance mindset where I feel like what's for me will be for me, and I don't need to accept every opportunity, because all money isn't good money. So
Yeah.
I think that like that is what I'm trying not to work twice as hard. This year I'm trying to work half as hard, but make more, or cultivate more abundance in my life, whether that's more money so that I can buy the time back that I feel like I'm missing. So I really feel like money for me is just a tool to buy more time, whether it's to help my family in some way or another, or to just make life a little bit more convenient for me. So I'm trying not to work twice as hard this year or any other year.
That's great. I'm glad to hear that. I think that is a great lesson for all us, busy women, entrepreneurs, women who are out there doing the damn thing, working hard. I think, yeah, if we can work smart, put systems in place to support us, scale in sustainable ways, and just avoid burnout, right? Do those things that bring us abundance of joys, abundance of light, laughter, love, and less of the grueling, emotionally toxic, draining things that we sometimes do as practitioners. Janice, I want you to just
Yeah.
end by telling people how they can reach you and find you. And I want to just thank you for coming on the show.
It was such a pleasure, Janelle. I'm so glad that we got a chance to meet virtually. I would say people can find me on LinkedIn. My name is just Janice Gassam Asare on LinkedIn. Or if you type in the pink elephant, some of my newsletters may pop up on LinkedIn because I have a weekly newsletter where I talk about some of the topics we've been talking about in more detail in writing. So if you're on LinkedIn, but I can be found by the same name on the other socials. So if you're not a LinkedIn person, you could find me on Instagram as well. But I spend most of my time on LinkedIn, or you could go to my website, drjanicegassam.com.
Quite frankly, if they are interested in diversity, equity, and inclusion, and they don't know who you are, they are under a rock. They absolutely need to run and find your newsletter stat. It is fire. I read it regularly, and I so appreciate you. I am a super fan, and I loved having you on the show. Thank you so much for coming. And for those of you who enjoyed the show just as much as I did, don't forget to click like and subscribe below. Drop your comments in the chat. Let me hear from you how much you loved hearing from Janice, and we'll see you next time on another episode. Thanks again, Janice.
Thank you.
Bye.